Good afternoon, and welcome to the DeYoung Museum. My name is Devin Malone, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Community Engagement at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Today's program, Creating Art in Diaspora, offers the perspectives of two artists, Rupi C. Tut and Maya Salame, who will explore the creative process as it relates to identity and specifically identity within diaspora. Before we launch into today's program, I'll take a moment to introduce today's moderator. Lena Karamali is a student at Columbia University, where she is pursuing a master's degree in human rights studies. In 2021, she graduated from Stanford University with a bachelor's degree in comparative studies in race and ethnicity and a minor in human rights. And she strives to center her work in social justice and human rights advocacy. She is also, last but certainly not least, the 2023 summer intern in public programs. You can clap for that. Please join me in welcoming Lena, as well as Rupi and Maya, and thank you so much for attending today's program.
Thank you, Devin. As Devin mentioned, my name is Lena, and I'm the Public Programs intern this summer here at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Thank you all so much for being here today to join our conversation about creating art in diaspora with two wonderful artists. Living in diaspora, or in a state of dispersal from one's homeland, is an intensely personal and exceedingly complicated experience that in itself can be difficult to explain. The process of creating art while in a state of diaspora, therefore, can pose challenges and varies greatly from artist to artist. Today we have with us two artists who use very different mediums, but both have diasporic roots that intertwine with their artwork in different ways. We are so excited to welcome to the DeYoung today poet Maya Salome and painter Rupi C. Tut. While unfortunately Maya can't be with us in person today, we're grateful to have her here over Zoom to participate in this conversation. Maya Salome is the author of How to Make an Algorithm in the Microwave and Rue. She is the winner of the Atel Adnan Poetry Prize and the Markowitz Award for Exceptional New LGBTQ Writers. She has served as a National Student Poet, America's highest honor for youth poets, and received fellowships from institutions including President's Committee for the Arts and Humanities, the Institute of Diversity for the Arts, and the Breadloaf Environmental Writers Conference. Her work has appeared in Poetry, The Rumpus, Agony, and the LA Times, among others. To begin our program, Maya will read a few of her poems and talk a little bit about her work. After Maya's presentation, Rupi will discuss her work and share images of some of her stunning paintings. Rupi C. Tut creates paintings on paper and linen using handmade pigments. Her work is rooted in personal history. Tut is a grandchild of refugees, an immigrant, a mother, and a preservationist of traditional Indian painting techniques in use since the 18th century AD. Tut's meticulous line work explores the relationship to homeland and the criteria of belonging as an immigrant and a woman. Tut has enjoyed solo exhibitions, including Search and Rescue at Jessica Silverman in San Francisco, A Recipe for Brown Skin at the Triton Museum of Art in Santa Clara, and A Journey Back Home at the Peel Art Gallery and Museum Archives in Ontario. Tut's work is in the permanent collection of Sacramento's Crocker Art Museum, San Francisco's Asian Art Museum, and here at the DeYoung Museum. With that, I'll pass it off to Maya for our first presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Lena. I'm so happy to be with everyone today. I'm sad that I was unfortunately unable to be there in person. I tested positive for COVID yesterday, so trust me when I say it's for everyone's best interest that I not be there, but I'm definitely here with you all in spirit. So to talk a little bit about, I'm going to share some of my poems today, but before I did that, I wanted to share a little bit about my art practice and center ourselves in some of my own creative genealogy, approach, and history. So I started writing when I was around 11 years old, and I was writing short stories ever since I was in elementary school, and the stories became shorter and shorter until eventually I had to admit to myself that they were poems. And they began as stories of origin, and I think I've always and continue to write stories of origin. I've always been informed in my writing by the oral storytelling traditions passed down to me by my own family, and also through my own history and connection to Arab traditions of oral storytelling. I'm also informed in my work by my belly dance practice. I've been a dancer since I was 7 years old, and I'm lucky to also be informed in my work by my fellow creatives and the artists that I'm lucky to call my friends. I've been especially informed by the work of my friend Benny Siam and my friend Angel Smith, who are respectively visual artists and poets in their own right. So that's kind of to ground us a little bit in my own history, my creative genealogy. I definitely deem some of my primary literary inspirations as being Khalil Gibran, Nizar Abani, Franny Choi, Solmaz Sharif, and Dennis Smith, just off of the top of my head. But my genealogy definitely spans at least dozens of other poets who shine through in my work and inform it. With that in mind, I'm going to share some poems with you all. Some of them come from my debut collection, How to Make an Algorithm in the Microwave, and some are from a new collection that I'm working on as well. So this first poem is called, and bear with me, my voice is not at its best. Sleep apnea with city block. One night the street is to the left, and the next its arteries repaved. 916, my mother watches me in the bathroom. The house shrinks to the fabric across my breast, and haven't I been good? Crossed my legs for the priests and capitalists. 61, it takes me 4 neighborhoods to fall asleep. I scrape the skin off nectarines. 916, the rich devour my coast, buying homes by the same ocean that stole so many husbands. The sea is the last wife, and teenagers dump electronics in her lap. 619, it's the end of January, and I'm still anemic. 9-1, I pull her shirt and make myself an altar. 6-1, a street is built like this. An icon sold a limb of cement, a relic found the internet. I stashed the orange moon under my 5th molar, and it's been feeding me ever since. 916, and Lemon Grove looks like the Mediterranean from 2 blocks down, and once I dreamt I had a daughter. I never slept again. 9-1, Sayada, like cicadas in August. 6-1, I am singing. It is the rosary again. 916, I want to be ordinary, intact as a man in uniform. 9-1, I sing like an elegy with the city in it. Thank you. This next poem is called How to Survive the Apocalypse While Remaining Desirable. You waltz through the bouquet of zombies outside the grocery store, skip pristine sneakers over Frankenstein feet in the attic, nap in the bed with the dead bud in it. You still wear short dresses, ripple your town walk. For a while you boyfriend terror, but eventually stick to being friends. Brown yoked heads in the skillet. The dead woman's gown is hissing, but it doesn't matter. Whatever happens, history will conjugate. Dial your skeleton headphones to Solange, scrawl the obituary and spit. Let her sing you the sound of rain. This next piece is called Logarithm 14. Recursion. Emulsion, years, teeth. Recursion. Bint. Recursion girl. Recursion, I was a boy growing up. New algorithm with crinkles around it that demonstrate the age to which I survived. Recursion, I'm still lipsticked somewhere, inebriating the room. There's Venus remnants in my ears and my throat is full. I gesture like the Colorado. I am old enough to be conscripted. Recursion girl, recursion bint. Between my ribs, it smells like cigarettes and cracked oranges. Recursion, there's no difference between musicians and women. I am 153 pounds, 5'8" bint. I am a growing boy who forgets to eat. Recursion, I'm wearing my Get Cat called jeans, cracked algorithm, Europa, Io, Metis, my gender, Callisto, recursion teeth, emulsion, girl, gears, moon. Girl, the sound raw. A fine auntie who's lived the definition saying, Masha'Allah. Like watching a man with your uncle's name tease a woman named Yasmin. Or during World War I, a British and French blockade, 1915 to 18, of the Syrian coastline impeded the entry of food and caused the deaths from starvation of more than 100,000 people, a quarter of the population. Analysts lining up, and one by one tracing my lips. Girl, bint, I arrange my testament body like all I ask is a witness. A witness. And maybe my eyes, riddled with the inherited potential for cataracts. I clatter through the artery of the road. Do we inherit hunger? Mercury, a geometrician, shuffling back into her jeans. Recursion, I grew up making saints out of men. This next piece is called At the End of July, we saw a brown bear from 10 feet away, and I asked about what attracts mammals to the forest, and Alicia said the smell of everything, even lotion. Everything in the bed is washed. The navy comforter, the synthetic silk pillowcases, and the night before I'd gone into the forest, without realizing my period was going to come the next day in a perfect oval when I had just got done organizing the bathroom and it was timed elegantly and irregular for its beauty, red and viscous and hungry, like I'd been once, before I'd ever loved anybody. The night before, my friends dragged me camping, and it was Tahoe and dark, but I was laid in a thermal sleeping bag, feeling a dam between my legs, and for a moment, I felt like the Miriam I had been named. Brows smeared with the effort of crossing my ankles, but even though no one would come with me outside, I ventured a couple feet from our yellow tent and squatted in the dirt for 4 minutes. I swear the Jordan left me. My friend laughed from inside. She said I was prolific, and I was. This next poem is called Pun It with Amy Winehouse. AA. Like dime store gold, I pile on a couch for the holiday and shine like rust. I am 6, the television is blaring. Her hair a beehive, crosses piled on her neck. She scats her indigo stomach, Marlboro, staccato body, battered jeans. AA. Amy opens her mouth with a country in it and croons my ribs open. Pimp. My dress blossoms loudly, and it is Boston. Bint her testament, my tattered breasts. Pimped. Words are a business. We bleed glottal for the audience. We confess elegant without confessing. AA. Algorithm. Amy makes a pattern with her throat. The screen stutters. Music is a technology. I serenade the headline from my marrow. Her voice iridescent. My Arabic, like me, bent and arching. Us on the kitchen floor reciting my stomach. AA. There is the photo of her in an insincere smile. Dad liked to say we were descended from royalty. He was lying, but I walked like I believed him. The screen cracks. AA. We pour in jasmine, rain, oranges. We peer back. I have a brittle conviction I will make a beautiful woman. This next piece is called Beige Tea with Rico Nasty on it, and it's for my friend Hung. Hung and their ravenous love for life, their smile warmer than Henny, their sidewise wink. It's August and the antidepressants are working. I beam in my dress rife with abrasions, slices of my hips and ribs shining from the slits. I bruise so easy, and it's almost the end of the summer. You can taste it in everyone's voices, and Hung has a way of making me playful again, teasing me into venturing out of the new apartment. We christen the bathroom with smoke. We have pleasant conversation with our mothers over the phone, gossip about the church daughters like we aren't them. Outside, sirens ring, but the fire isn't us. And Hung has a way of admitting things that makes you want to love them. They explain how to cook seafood boil without letting the corn dry out. We talk about our mothers, and they're more people than ghosts. And we're more boys than daughters. Grinning and walking slow at the Kalani concert, we worship at her indigo outfit surrounded by other church daughters. When we finally get back home, all we want is the washed sheets, the gray camp chair on the balcony, the quiet of insects at night. Our merch cost $50 and the train was late, but most things can be fixed if you put a little bit of Old Bay on them. This next poem is called Obad with Lobotomized Mountain, after Kaveh Akbar. My mother refused an epidural, so I'd never mispronounce anything. We drove past the mountains once, and the radio trembled like it had been kissed by static or God. I'm a sharkish girl with a rude mouth, new molars jagged as cliffs. Me and Dad sit in the dip of the Vandross, and he tells me about his city like it doesn't exist or like its neighboring ocean is unemployed. Says shit like, in Trablos, morning is on everything, and I become an abundance in a thin seat. Asking the catechism teacher, do soldiers go to heaven? If someone breaks into my house looking for bread and I panic and bonk them with my skillet, which one of us gets punished? Who gets punished? The hospital I was born in was called Zion. We drive past the mountains. I'm wearing striped shorts, and the flames cling to the bluffs like an expensive dress. I am 4. Maybe California is my true country. Maybe her fires. I pull a bag of tinted negatives from my ribs. I was named after water. This next poem is called The Algorithm Picks Her Bugs in the Mirror. This Wednesday, I dyed my hair the color of lithium. I have cataracts from an iPhone 6 when a man in a municipal building died. I meant he was sitting on a plastic chair in a hospital, and his face was split like a bruised marigold. His motherboard had left a yellow purse by the entrance, and he was never young like that again. I dyed my hardware the color of lie. My cousin's drowned in chrome, but I can run myself any dress I loop. I met California on a public domain. Desire is a logic. Desire is a logic. Desire is a logic. There's a corner of my womb in someone's browser history. There's a byline beneath my arms I can't pinch. If someone doesn't kiss me soon, I'm going to take the skin off. I have 3 more pieces for you all today. This next one is called Bronchitis is a Beautiful Name for a Girl. California is kindling again. It's been 6 bushfires, and I'm nobody's daughter calculating beanials on the hood of a Buick. My brother tugs his sleeves and his lungs strain. We scratch the second-hand Commodore's album, and he smiles mundane and lovely, like a grocery list, nail polish carabiner Advil fruit. I'm calling because the city is filled with pollutants, because the duplex with the red roof is falling apart. We argue like tonsils, swollen and stubborn. We watch the In-N-Out cashier wash his gloves off in the sink, and my shirt makes me look fertile. We laugh about used biology books, the Disney movie about the dragon boy. We make the sky bloom. We split the scrambled runes in our stomach. I'm calling because I have an aching letter in my mouth the insurance won't cover, but I'm really afflicted with wanting. The smell of pavement after rain. I'm calling because I have no aunts in this country to call for condoms or advice, but I walk around with pearls jammed between my legs. I've never loved the same mistake twice. My brother dances, and the song roams throats till it finds mine. In a dream, the algorithm broke the windows of It's Massachusetts. I'm a magnesium-deficient miracle who only shaves on Thursdays. He's got new Skechers. We make calligraphy with our shoes walking back from school. The rash of coffee shops in El Cajon. The dilapidated vaunts on Medford Street. I'm calling because California is kindling again, and he refuses medicine like I used to. We found the generic for Sudafed, and it tasted green. I still bow my head in churches. My survival instinct is too strong. This next piece is titled For Every Siren with a Drill, and it's for every beauty worker who has loved me in their own way. And God bless the nail techs, the girls pressing their acrylics to yours, blotting your concealer in their shared apartments, to whom you admit you find your fingers wide and mannish, the girls who say, yup, Catholic dads, this was how I hid tank tops under jackets. This was how I folded my hair. Thank you, Sets by M. Thank you, Ida, from the wax joint on Adams Avenue. Your new man sounds like a better father than your last, and your skin really does glow when you're in love. Thank you, Arwa, who on occasional Saturdays I can convince to henna me. Bless the coconut oil you prescribed my ink. Bless our shared hymns. Girlhood passed with loving instructions. The roommate who taught me diffusing, and the best Bath and Body Works flavor, cherry blossom. You file my thumbs into blades. Pull my hair from its follicles. We launder my knotted parts. And for the next 3-4 hours, our mouths are stained with the same longing. This next poem is called One Day We'll Grow a Mint Plant to Maturation. And love teaches us minute things. That I get angry at missing you. That you need 20 to 30 minutes to pout, or else is said to allow the grief the time to rest its legs. We both take a good amount of minutes to genuflect. We both cry slow and quiet sometimes. You have a smile that could bridge the Jordan. My hands get purple in the snow. I still have too little blood, but more hemoglobin, less afraid. I roll you a chamomile cigarette. You fry shrimp on a quiet Thursday after work. You hum in your sleep. Thank you so much for sitting with my work, and now I'm happy to turn it over to Rupi.
Maya's got me thinking about the cherry blossom by Body and Works. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm Rupi Sitat. And sorry, I'm just absorbing that beautiful poetry right now. See, that's part of being the beauty of an artist, is you're always open to everything. And when you're open, it goes deep, and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So you just take a deep breath. Okay. All right, there we go. So I'm a painter, and I paint using handmade pigments that I make in my studio. And I paint them on this beautiful hemp paper that's sourced from India. And recently I started painting on linen. I'm also a calligrapher sometimes, even though it wasn't titled, but painting is something that for me is an act of love, an act of surrender, and an act of respect. For me, the voice as an artist is a very important responsibility, especially because of the reason that we kind of gathered here today talking about diaspora and representing multiple different ways of being, multiple different ways of speaking, multiple different ways of relating and identifying oneself. And then as an artist, that responsibility and that voice for me is a way of not explaining, but noting all of those different complicated ways of being an individual, especially attached to a diaspora, can feel at any given moment. So for me as an artist, some of the voices that I take on are voices of an immigrant, voices of a mother, voices of a woman, and definitely sometimes also voices of a responsible, but sometimes a responsible citizen of this planet watching it fall apart. So those are the different individuals I kind of have to make peace with every day in my studio, I would say. Just to let you know, for me, diaspora is obviously a word that's linked to me being present in a country where I wasn't born, but also I practice a traditional art form that originated in a country that I was born in. So for me, the very traditional training that I've had in the style called Pahari painting, which is more popularly known as Indian miniature painting, and that's a misplaced label for it that was originated during the colonial times and has not gone away because that's what it's known as still. But Pahari painting kind of belongs to that region over there, and I have this pointer to use. That region right there is the region that's kind of the Himalayas, all the way extending down to the Punjab region where I was born. And that's where that style originated, has all those different schools. Not trained in all the schools because I fell in love with one of them and I stuck to it. And you might question, how did I train myself? I did not live in India for many, many years. Instead, I was able to get lucky and found a teacher who has trained, and a female teacher, which was a big deal, who has trained in the style for about 17 years and then imparted a lot of that knowledge to me. And I've trained for the last 8 years. The very important bit that I would mention about this training is that it's not only a training in, say, the visual language. So if it's a deer or a face or a nose or a hand, it's not just the gestural visual painting, but it's also the methodology behind it. So mixing the pigments, how do you mix the pigments? Where do you source them? How does each pigment behave? How does the indigo behave? How does the cinnabar behave? And how are these recipes then put together and then bound to this two-dimensional surface, which is usually paper? And how do you respect that two-dimensional surface through that mixing of pigments and then through that practice of visual style? So it's quite an involved process. I deeply respect it, but at the same time, it is definitely something that I keep brushing up on because I do consider myself someone who's preserving those techniques. And let me go to, this was the earliest kind of painting you can say that I created under the guidance of my teacher. And this one painting can take 2 weeks and working on it for 8 hours a day. And that's just the amount of layered work that this traditional training demands. Now, for me, someone who's trained traditionally but practices very contemporary work and has a very contemporary voice, engaging with topics that are social, political, and related to what we all see every day, it was really important for me to not only take the style and build alongside, but at the same time challenge it as much as I can. This style is practiced mostly by male painters, and there are very few female painters practicing it even today, and I'm one of those painters. So for me, it's a very important thing to challenge it through the inclusion of, maybe female characters that are at the center of the paintings that would generally not be depicted doing things that maybe I do in everyday life. So here was a woman that is seated in a traditional pose, and in a painting from the past, she might be cooking, or she might be bathing a child, which, not to say that those are not things I do, but at the same time, for me, it's also about building the vocabulary and building the library of images of women depicted in this style also. So for me, it's about, giving her a burnishing stone, and she's burnishing that paper, which is something I do in my studio, and giving her, another layer of love that she knows how to practice in her life. And that's me grinding yellow pigment, which is a lot of fun and builds a lot of good muscles in your arms. I wanted to share this image, and I moved here when I was 12 years old with my family, and this is me being picked up from the airport the day I got here to this country in 1997 on April 7th. And it's a day we still celebrate very deeply in our family because it took a lot of work to get to this country. And I even remember this flight very clearly, and it was my very first flight. And that day and that 12-year-old, I did not know that I carried so much with me. I did not know what home was until I left it. And I grew up on these beautiful stories that my grandparents would tell about how they became refugees overnight. And I say beautiful because the way they wove the stories into bedtime stories. So I was growing up in a home where every night a bedtime story was about, okay, this part of the journey, and then this part of that exodus, and this part of what they lost, and how there was always a home that they kept thinking of, how they always thought of these people that they lived next door to. And I didn't realize what that was deeply until I moved. And I think for me, the practice that I create and the work I create is deeply informed by that. And I'll go over it more later, but I did want to share this image because this picture and then the picture of me, the very first photo of me at Disneyland, are the two, treasured experiences for me as an immigrant kid at that point. And those are two photos that I always look back to kind of make sure that whenever I'm depicting my experience as an immigrant, I look at the truth of that child, of that girl that moved to this country, who wanted to, be successful right away. And the success meant that I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get good grades, I'm going to become a doctor. Because my parents and their struggle will be honored in that way. And today when I'm an artist, I still take that, still keep that at the back of my mind, that motivation that I had at 12 years old and what I do today and why I do it, and how does that still honor the struggle of my grandparents, my parents. And I wouldn't say it was a struggle for me, but at the same time, I think if you deeply think of anything, you can find bits that could have been better. And this painting is part of that depiction of the immigrant experience that comes in. This painting is called Fronte on the Beach, and I don't know how many of you relate to different immigrant families, but the beach was always a picnic of some sort of cultural foods that are made in the home, and fronte, or specifically alu fronte, which is potato, were something that we would take to the beach. And this is how the spread looks like in my, when I look back at it, when I look at it as a beautiful experience. But back then, it was just more about how do we eat these frontes quickly out of the trunk of the car and then go to the beach so nobody sees that we're eating fronte at the beach. We should not be doing that. But, it's these really complicated experiences of being an immigrant where you are trying to be yourself, but also trying to hide bits of yourself. For me, being an immigrant has also kind of, actually, let's do this one first. The second strong identifier for me is obviously being a woman. And I grew up in a very liberal family where being a woman was actually, being a woman and being an artist were one of those things that you were kind of told that you're kind of chosen. You're these beautiful beings and you're chosen to do what you do and just go and fly. Being part of the diaspora, however, I have seen more challenges being a woman because there is always a struggle between values. Am I too expressive? Am I too individualistic? Am I not as family oriented? Am I not as much, involved in what needs the family has versus what needs I have? And this struggle for me was something that I think is ongoing always, but I do think that as someone who's had agency most of my life, I'm able to say, no, this is my time, and I can make those boundaries and I can push back on those patriarchal baggages that come with being a woman. And this painting about, us being targeted most of the time, and even if you're not being targeted, you feel like you might be targeted, and those targets can come to you out of very innocent ideas. So this painting and then this one right here about what does that experience look like for brown women then in this country when we are targeted for the way we look, or if there is something that does happen to a brown woman in this country, how is she approached? How is she treated? How is she even mourned if she dies? I think this painting, which is called An American Woman, is for me that expression and that question of, what are we perceiving brown women as in this country? Are we really seeing them as individuals beyond the productive value that they add to the workforce? Are we seeing them beyond the productive value that they're adding into their homes, into their households? And these are questions I ask also because I've seen my mom, work and then have a dinner ready every single day, and then also balance those patriarchal expectations all her life. So of course, as I became a mother, all the central characters in my painting started to have more and more baggage that they were carrying. I have 3 children, 5 and under, so thanks for getting me away from my toddler twins today. That really helps. But this, this painting, which is called Power Trip, and I always question, what does a power trip look like for women? And for a man, a power trip looks very different. But for a woman, the power trip is, us changing and losing and taking up power depending on which door we're walking into. And that happens every single day. It could happen within an hour, depending on which door we're walking through. And this character right here, she's wearing this armor, she's carrying this shield, she's carrying this parachute on the back, she's carrying a baby bottle, she's carrying this globe of her dreams, which is she's still trying to take care of. And at the same time, all she has, and she's wearing this birthday hat because we've all known that as women, we're just expected to perform wherever we are, whatever that performance looks like. But at the end of it, we're given a needle to fix a huge problem, and that's what she's holding in her hand. So motherhood for me has brought a lot of layers of, looking at what does it mean to be even who I am and who my mother is and who are the other mothers around me. But I do believe that motherhood is not what has brought the superhuman capabilities into my life. I believe those are something that womanhood does, and motherhood just harnesses them. I strongly disagree with the idea that motherhood means being superhuman. I think motherhood is about harnessing a lot of the superhuman qualities, but a lot of women do it differently, and I think that's something that needs to be mentioned too. And to kind of sum up what motherhood and what kind of this individual who's a central character of my paintings looks like right now is that, she is this person who has, and there's three sea dragons around her at the moment, which is, yes, it's my 3 kids. But, there's a woman that she's pursuing this, love for what she does. She has this halo around her where she has some breathing space. She has these dragons around her who are not necessarily attacking her, but they're still encircling her, and you don't really know what the relationship is at that point. She has, certain betrayals. So that chain on her is actually a poetic connection to the love story of Soni Mahwal, which is from the Punjab region, about how she has these patriarchal betrayals that lead to a tragic death. And a lot of us as women, I think especially the characters in my paintings, are these women who face patriarchal betrayals on a daily basis, but at the same time, we don't necessarily die. We move forward. We have certain tools. We have certain support systems that allow us to stay afloat. This is one of the most important questions I ask myself in my studio, and I would like to say that what is home is a question I still don't have answer to. Is it the home that my mom grew up in? Is it the home I grew up in? Is it the home my kids are growing up in? I don't necessarily have an answer, and I think this question still drives a really painful aspect of my studio time. And just like Lena said, that idea of dispersal and just being dispersed is something that I feel very regularly, mainly because of the stories of displacement that my grandparents shared with me. And this painting called Leaving Home, along with this one called Finding Roots, and then Claiming Land, which I would now change the title to. I don't like the word claim anymore. But these three paintings are about that experience of, leaving home as a group of people, then finding roots individually, usually in a new place, and not necessarily knowing how to balance the different worlds we're coming from. Losing the key to our dreams sometimes, working with day and night. I don't know how many of you were growing up in times when phone calls were really expensive, but I wasn't able to talk to my grandparents much because they wouldn't be awake at certain times in India, and sometimes we just didn't have, I think this was before the phone cards became more accessible and more readily available, but just the dance of day and night and how that prevented that connection to home. And then again, the most important thing for me is language and the poetry of language. And I think these three things we balance, and sometimes they are let go of in this diasporic life. And then again, this is for me what is happening right now. This painting, Claiming Land, was about the diasporic conversations that are built on struggles of, maybe the immigrant parents or the grandparents that moved here, and how those conversations then honor the narratives that are around struggle, but then also lead to a new sprouting plant or a seedling at the top, where then the ideas and the knowledge and the generational struggle and resilience is transferred to the generations that are going to grow up here. And I'm going to end with this important question, which is the current focus of what I'm doing, which is that because I never saw my grandmothers after I moved here at the age of 12, and they passed away, I think, 5 years after, and then 7 years after, I was able to go see my grandfather, but I lost connection with that entire generation when I moved here. And that's, for me, the biggest loss. I didn't get to have a lot of conversations with them I really wanted to have. There were a lot of silences that I feel now that I wish I could have spoken to them about. And I think now I say that I try to find those female ancestors in my paintings, whether it's, I wish I could have asked them more questions about the journey and, the loss of a child that one of my grandmothers had during that journey, during partition of India, or their amazing powers of storytelling and weaving words together, and that they have still left an impression on me. Or then again, one of my grandmothers was an orator, and she used to give speeches, and she was part of protests and movements. I wish I could have asked her, how does she get the courage, and how does she see the world as it breaks apart right now? Because I think for me, it's important to recognize that it's also their generation, and it's also the women who possibly will be seen as someone not walking into the Diang to look at this painting, which is in the collection of the Diang. But at the same time, her perspective on how the climate is changing or how the world is shifting is as important is more important, I would say, because it's a perspective built on multiple years of observing the world. And I think for me to paint these central characters and to find these ancestors and then create them in paintings is my current way of keeping alive what they have taught me and what they've spoken to me about. And a lot of these ancestors, the newer ones that I've painted, will be at my solo at the ICA starting end of September. But I'll end here. This is just really lovely that all of you are here to listen to this. It's very personal work, of course, and I love the nods that were happening during the talk. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'll end right here.
Thank you both so much for those presentations. That was really great to hear. I'd love to start out our conversation asking a question about conceptualizing your identity in diaspora. How do you conceptualize and define that identity? And how does that perception play a role in your work? And I know, Rupi, you touched on this a bit, so I'd love to start with Maya, and then Rupi, if you have anything to add on yours after that.
Yeah, in terms of the way that I conceptualize my own identity, for me, first and foremost, I'm an Arab girl. Secondly, I'm an Arab American girl. And I think a lot about that placement, especially with the privileges that my blue passport brings me. I was born and raised in America, in San Diego, and trying to maintain the balance of being both connected to Syria and Lebanon, which are my ancestral homelands, and also acknowledging my ties to, you'll notice in my poems, I'm a huge California nationalist. So my love also for California as, in my head, another of my adopted countries.
Thank you. Rupi, is there anything you'd like to elaborate on from your presentation?
I feel like this is probably all what I spoke of. The one thing is, I think there are a lot of nuances of all of our identities anyway, and I think what diasporic identity adds to that is that there is like a bridging that happens at all times, and I think if anything else, we become experts in bridging. And I feel like I'm always bridging together past and present, histories of different lands, and and the readings as well that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out, how does, for example, even the climate play out in India right now, and how does that relate back to here, and how can I relate those two, and especially when I create work for a community that I represent, I want them to be able to relate those two stories. So it becomes you become a historian of sorts too, or an anthropologist of sorts as well. Especially the research becomes difficult because I think the academic research doesn't always bridge those two things. Yeah.
Thank you both. The next thing I'd love to ask you both is, you both have references to your diasporic identities in your work, but what's the greatest challenge been that you faced when you're striving to capture a certain lived experience as it relates to diaspora, in the process of creating your art, once you've created it, how you want it to be interpreted, anything like that? And we'll start with Maya.
Yeah, I think, Rupi, what you said about bridging, that resonated a lot. I feel a lot of my work is bridging across nations, continents, and identities, but especially as I think about representing my own identity in my work. The primary population I hope to reach is Arab girls and Arab American girls. And it's been interesting to me across my career to see the very different people within that identity that my work has reached. I received an email 3 years ago from like a 13-year-old girl who was living in Saudi Arabia saying that she had read a poem of mine and it made her feel free. And I had never expected that a poem that I had written in San Diego would reach all the way to Saudi Arabia, but it did. And I think that also, especially myself as a poet, especially interested in technologies, usually from a more negative lens, thinking about the impact of surveillance technologies on Arab American and Muslim American communities. I think it was especially kind of joyful to see the ways that technology can also facilitate that bridging in so many new and unexpected ways.
Thank you.
It was such a long list of challenges. Okay, so firstly, like a very practical challenge that I think I face, sometimes I used to don't even do it anymore, is whenever I applied for anything. I think we all know that when you apply for institutional, any type of resources, you only have limited space on what you can speak and say. And for me as an artist who's traditionally trained, and for me as an artist who represents different homelands and then different ways of identifying and being, how do you describe that in really, really short sentences? So that was always a challenge for me. So that's why I do take the opportunity to speak whenever I can, because I think that also finesses the way of saying that, because I don't think they're going to create the space any larger. The other challenge also is, oh my God, I lost it. It'll come back to me. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. We can go ahead and move on to the next question then. So what is the relationship of that you have with the process of creating your art versus with a finished product? Is there a different relationship? Does it change over time? How does that usually go for you? And Rupi, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, and I think there was a process video I didn't share, by the way. And it was about just the sounds at the studio. But process for me is actually what I'm attached to in the studio. With the traditional methodology of doing things a certain way, that takes a long time. Like to make the gold, it takes me 2-3 days. To make the yellow pigment, it takes maybe half an hour of mixing it, and then at least few more hours of testing it and making sure it's ready. So it's a time-consuming process. That's not the only reason I'm attached to the process. It's because every time I engage with the process, I am kind of, I'm reminiscing of things that do take time and skill. And I definitely believe in that. I think skill is very important when you create work. That's what I believe. And then perfecting skill is something that's acceptable to me, but perfecting artwork is not acceptable. And that way, I think perfection is a pitfall. But perfecting your methodology, I think, is a really great way of practicing art. I do believe that. For me, the process is also very much about surrendering to the art form and then letting your ego go. Every time I approach the material, it is larger than me. It is more important than me. And that is something that is a very grounding thing that I do. It's almost a ritual in the studio. And that allows, I think, also a very healthy distance between me and my work. When the work is finished, I am very much happy to see it go, because what I have is those testing sheets where I was working hard to test all the pigments, or I have the blueprint, because each painting is, whether it's even the painting that were used for the cover for the cover of the event, or the image for the event, that I have a blueprint line drawing of her in the studio. So she's still there, but the painting leaves. So process is something that is kind of the thing that keeps you truthful as a painter. For me, it keeps me truthful because I can't really speed up grinding indigo. And if I do it, it's just not going to turn out really well, or I can't really, there's no way to cheat it for me. And I think it's good maybe because in this instant gratification world, if I could, I would cheat it probably because, who wouldn't? I have 3 kids, there's a lot going on at home. Yeah.
Thank you. Devin and I got the amazing chance to see Rupi's studio and see the process, and it was truly fascinating and does take a lot of work. I'm not sure if you mentioned, but can you tell everyone sort of what the timeline for that process looks like, grinding the pigments and getting the paper and doing every part of the process?
Yeah, I think so there is, of course, the process of developing the work, actually, right? Developing the composition of what am I going to paint? Why am I going to paint it? Why does it need to be said? And then the process of putting together materials for that painting. So if I'm about to do, the work for the solo right now at the ICA, I spend at least 2 weeks before the painting begins on preparing the materials, which include the pigments themselves and something called a binder, which binds the pigments to the paper and the surface, preparing the paper, which is sometimes includes just washing it or burnishing it down. And burnishing is something that you take a burnishing stone and you kind of, imagine if you're polishing the paper, which creates a really beautiful surface for you to work on, because the brush is kind of like 2 hairs at the tip, which is the brush associated with this style. And without sounding like, you should really value that I put in so much time in my work, I think it's more about what I would want you to take away more is that I value how I do it. So if it's done well is what I'm trying to go for, not just spending time on it. The really important thing for me also is that a lot of these processes then kind of take me back to the kitchens of my grandmothers, because like the grinding of pigments and then some of the sounds which were in that video, and I'll share it some other time on my website or on Instagram, but it's those sounds that are very familiar, and it sounds like a kitchen and it sounds like a home. And that for me is a very emotional process. And like I said, the respect I have for this style is something that I maintain, I strongly hold on to, which is also difficult because when I think of having an assistant or someone who would train in this style and work with me, it's hard for me to imagine that because I can't train somebody to respect something deeply, right? To love something deeply. You can train somebody technically, but you can't do it unless you are thinking of something. When you're doing the gold like this in a plate for 6 hours, you have to be grounded in a thought that is about love and respect, I believe. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And then we'll move to Maya if you want to answer the question, but also elaborate a bit on your process as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Rupi, that the process has become such a deep portion of the way that I approach my work. I also think living in the way that we do, as you mentioned, in a society based on instant gratification and a deeply capitalistic one that oftentimes values product over process, it's had to be a willful unlearning process for me to really decenter product and respect and continue to ritualize my process. For me, my process is oftentimes also a part and portion of my spiritual practice, both a form of ancestor veneration, communication, and worship. And that often means also patience with the process. It means I'm also a big believer in when I'm frustrated with a poem, one of the traits I've had to work against as a writer is when my first collection was coming out, I when I learned that it was going to be published, I had this urge to my friend told me that I was editing it to death. And so oftentimes part of that process, especially as a writer, is to trust the work, especially once it is going out into the world, and to be like, okay, I'm releasing this child into the world and I'm going to let her be and breathe as I created her and trust my intentions, my talent, and my growth there. I also think being able to have the privilege to see my work grow and evolve across the years has been a really joyful experience for me. I have pieces that were published 2 or 3 years ago that I would not want published now, but that's part of being an author and part of being an artist and sharing of yourself with the world. I think also my personal process is usually I have a long running Google document of lines, stanzas, titles, quotes, fragments. I kind of magpie my artistic process. I collect things that I love, and then I'll come back and try to give voice to the more formless body that the idea is beginning to take shape in. It also often means once I've created something, leaving it alone for a little bit and coming back to it after a week or a month has passed and being able to revisit the work with clearer eyes. I'm also a big believer in versions and drafting and mess. One of my favorite parts of the process is creating something I'm unsure about or that frustrates me and being able either to leave it alone to rest and coming back to it or creating 8 duplicates of it in a different document and reformatting it the way that I'm wondering it may want to look like. I'm a big believer in letting the poem be what it wants to be. And oftentimes for me, that includes a process of iteration and interpretation. So creating different versions, being in community with my friends who and fellow artists who I trust with my work to read and help me think on and assess it. And also being at peace with the finished product. And like Ruby said, perfection is a trap. And I'm working, and I'm always working on trying to make sure that perfect is not the enemy of good. Yeah.
Thank you. I think something that both of you have sort of touched on is external understanding of your work, how people experience it. And I think we just have time for one more question before we move to the audience Q&A section. But I'd love to hear from both of you sort of what do you wish more people knew about your work and what do you hope that they see and think when they look at or listen to or read your work? And we can start with you, Ruby.
Well, that's a big one. What do I hope that people see? I mean, I genuinely hope that they see the painting and want to get closer to it. I always strive to make the paintings like a beauty trap. So if they're beautiful, I feel like people will be encouraged to, kind of get in and see the details that hide some of the truthful, some of the less pretty, some of the less beautiful aspects of our living in life. I also think that, now one of the things I try to do, so I usually only paint women. And, for me, I think it's very important to see these large brown bodies on, like the work at the ICA right now are going to be, 3 by 5 feet. And it's very important for me to have a moment of pause when I hope they have a moment of pause when they see that large figure on the canvas or on the linen or on the paper. There's subtleties in the work, so I would want enough of a silence and pause where the subtleties are noticed. Maybe imagine me creating the works, because I think that would give you an idea of, how much effort it has taken. But I do, the one thing that I always say is that, when I present my work, when I talk about it, I corrupt your relationship to it. So if you saw these paintings, again, I've already, biased you. But, I wish you see them before I get there, so you don't talk to me about them and you establish your relationship to the work. I think, and maybe this comes from my mom or it comes from just me taking the responsibility of being a diasporic artist very seriously, I do believe that every painting I make, every character I make, every brushstroke means something. And I don't know if I can put that on the audience to understand, but at the same time, maybe another artist, if they walk in the room, can also see that this is a possibility and this can be created. Like, if the teenager version of me has walked in, she would maybe not give the MCAT and just go to art school, or go to art school and fight for wanting to pursue this traditional style, which I didn't fight for it. Like I went to art school and tried to do it, but then they said no. I was like, okay, fine, I'll just be a doctor. Forget it. And I just, there's shows I've done because there's community in that area where I know that, kids who are like me, or were like the kid I was, will walk in there and maybe they'll read my name and they'll see that, it's a woman with a dupatta, or it's the trees that kind of happen to be in these decorative pieces in our homes, or it's the little, just little pieces of themselves, their mothers, their dads, their grandparents, I just want them to find pieces of themselves in the work. But then again, I think that not every painting makes a person stop. So if they don't stop, even that's okay, because I'm creating it for me anyway. So if you find something in it, that's amazing. But that's a really hard question to ask, because I do create the work thinking of the viewer always. I create the work for me because it's a lot of work. If I was creating it for somebody else, I wouldn't put in so much work, I think. But when I create the work, I do think that what do I want the eye of the viewer to scan, to see? And I think even these new paintings now, the body language of the characters is so different that, hopefully there's just bits of them in there somewhere. But I don't know the answer to the question. After giving such a long answer, I don't know the answer to the question.
No, that's really interesting to hear. Yeah, thank you. Maya?
Yeah, I feel that in terms of what I hope someone takes away from my work, or what I hope someone knows about my work, I view my work, as I've mentioned, my primary audience is my child self and girls like me. So I write for my child self, I write for other Arab girls, and I write for other hyphenated American girls more broadly. As an artist who also works multilingually often, it also includes being at peace with knowing that certain people won't understand my work. I work experimentally with both form and language. And so I'm also completely comfortable with people not understanding or even enjoying my work. I view my work as sharing of me. And so if I am to invite someone into my home, so to speak, I don't think it's their place to criticize parts of the decoration that they don't understand. I like to think that, I write for myself first, I write for girls like me second, and then everyone else is third. It's great if you take from it, especially because I feel that I write so much about family, genealogy, and girlhood, technology. These are things that near everyone has experiences with. Whether their experiences mirror mine is up to them to decide, and whether they feel that they can find some form of resonance, familiarity, or even home in my poetry is also for them to decide. I think in terms of I guess I don't think that I hope anyone has anything that they know when they enter my work, but I hope they enter it with openness and being able to take what they leave and take what they love and leave what they don't, which is what I do with others' work as well.
Thank you. That's really fascinating, and I love that phrase. With that, I think
If I can, I remembered one of the other challenges that I think was really important that I forgot before. But the one thing that I think as an artist working with stories that are connected to family history and community history, I think one of the challenges is to feel not like you're appropriating or extracting too much from those histories and that you're honoring them. And I think that's one of the things that is something that is really hard to do when you are creating from a diasporic perspective, is how much do you kind of extract from that identity without leaving it empty? Like, it has to be a meaningful pull, but not an extraction. Sorry, I just remembered that.
No, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you remembered. With that, I think we'll move into our audience Q&A. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and a staff member will bring a microphone to you.
Thank you, both of you, for sharing. Rupi, my question is for you. Absolutely love your art and really appreciate how you're able to put in so much of yourself, like just how personal it is. My question for you is, do you believe that the new immigrant experience today is different from, say, 20 years ago? And do you ever sort of consider reflecting that, or does that reflect in your work? And similarly, on the other end, when you think about India and Punjab specifically, some of the challenges that you've mentioned, thinking about sort of talking to your grandparents, the stories they told, or your parents, I do think many of those sort of patriarchal challenges still exist, but they might have evolved. They're perhaps not as obvious, but they still stay on the surface out there in Punjab as well. So do you ever sort of visit and let any of that sort of present state influence your work as well on both ends?
Just to ask you a question about the last question, you mean, do I see some of those challenges still when I go back there?
Yes, and if you see them, like, how have they changed, and how does that impact your thinking and your work?
The challenges of intergenerational communication. Yeah. What's your name?
Divjot.
Divjot, hi.
Hi.
And I forgot the first two questions. I'll answer the last one first, since I remember that one. I do go back there quite often, right? So since having kids, I haven't gone back as much, but like I'm there sitting there and searching through our family history books, and like I've become the family historian and just interviewing and like visiting these small museums in people's homes, like near the village that my family's from. I think there is a personal interest, so maybe I do look in more in these things, and maybe that's why they might feel like they do exist or don't exist. That's just a disclaimer I want to give, that I am looking very closely. As far as the intergenerational experiences and communication, and also I think recognition of what intergenerational experiences are, I think I do recognize them, or I'm noticing them because I also live in a multi-generational home. I notice 3 different paces of living in my own home. Like there's my kids, my parents, and myself, and all 3 of these generations live at a very different pace. And there were times when I was not noticing these paces, and I was not then noticing these intergenerational lack of communication, or hurdles to communication, or hurdles to being able to understand each other's stories, or even listen to each other's stories. So I think having that multi-generational living here allows me to then go back and notice some of that there. With that said, though, I do feel when I go back there, I don't recognize a lot. You know, it doesn't feel like it was the Punjab that I left when I was 12, because then that idea of homeland has lived on in my mind. Like home has become a character in my mind, right? And that character has gone through changes. And Punjab has been what it's been, and it's changed and done what it's done. And people have changed in the way they have changed. But with that said, that I'm a person who deeply relates to the Punjabi language, the Punjabi poetry, prose, and that stuff influences my work on a daily basis. And I engage with it on a daily basis. And I think it's the privileges of the job I have as an artist. But with I think there is a loss of stories happening, yes, every day. If it's loss of stories of my grandparents that I'm able to put into paintings and keep them alive, like, you know, I can hear my grandfather talk in my head any given moment. But there is a loss, like, you know, and I'm not talking to my own parents as much sometimes. So there's a loss of stories happening all the time. And it's only like a phone call that can solve that. But yeah, we don't do it, right? And your other two questions I forgot.
I guess my first question was just about, do you think that the new immigrant experience has changed versus, say, 20 years ago? And do you ever think of incorporating that in your art?
I think the experience has changed because when we moved here, we had to stand outside the embassy, like, I think 4 or 5 times we tried, but you go to the embassy like 4 a.m. and your turn comes, and this is in Delhi, and your turn would come, you would get the ticket, you would get an interview, and then maybe you would get accepted and get a visa to the country. Now it's not like that, right? A lot of things are happening online. A lot of processing is very different. So yeah, but of course experience is changing. I think why people are moving here is probably changing. I don't know as much about it because it's not my truth. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Any other questions in the audience?
I just wanted to ask what religion she is part of and how that affects her work.
Yeah, I was raised Maronite Catholic. I'm often, due to the flattening of Arab experience in America, I have been impacted in minor ways by Islamophobia as well, due to usually being assumed as belonging to Islam. But yes, I was raised in a Maronite Catholic community, which is kind of the Lebanese Arab version of Catholicism. And I think that's impacted my work in that I find Catholicism more generally to be a very ritualistic religion. I'm sure others would disagree with me, but the church in which I was raised, we had very ritualistic masses, very like lavish rituals of worship. So including incense, we had mass in Arabic, which I always really appreciated, and just a sense of adornment and intricacy, which was brought to worship that I think definitely informs my spiritual practice today.
Thank you. Any other questions? Is it on? Yes, hi. This is for both of you. So I also heard the bridges, and I love that visual or that idea. And as artists, what you feel is your responsibility with these bridges, because it's when you're on the bridges, you're neither here nor there, and you're creating something completely new, which doesn't always relate, like both sides won't really recognize it. So through your mediums, what you feel is your responsibility. Thank you. Rupi, you want to go first?
So I think it's a lonely life, basically. Like you're on the bridge because you're trying to figure out how to keep this as open as possible. And you are floating between two identities a lot. And it feels lonely at times. Actually, maybe feels lonely a lot of times. And I think also as a painter, my job is just a lot of isolation. So I'm alone a lot. And there's comfort in that. But when you're actually thinking of how do I, and you know, it's not that you're creating that bridge for somebody else, you're doing it for yourself, right? So when you're creating and thinking of that bridge, like how do these two things relate within me, and how do I express them? It's like looking at the mirror, but then really finding everything, and also then being kind of, like, I don't know, there's one huge moment in my life when you walk through the Holocaust Museum, and there's that door which says prejudiced and non-prejudiced. And as a kid, I was like, I'm not prejudiced. I walk, and that door is shut, and all of us walk through the prejudiced door, right? So it's kind of that moment for me that when you're creating a bridge between two identities, you have to accept as imperfect at all times. It's going to be imperfect. You're not going to find the answer. And I think my responsibility is to keep searching, even if there's no answer. And I know it might sound like, oh, why are you taking this so seriously? Why is this so important? And I think it is important because if there are bits of like our identity as an artist or my identity as a woman, as a maker, that bit of identity then gets translated into the painting, and that painting can genuinely be seen as a way of as an opening for somebody at some point, as a door, as a window. And I am one of those people who thinks about legacy a lot. And I think because women in general are not encouraged to think about legacy, I do it more. Because I'm like, no, my kids are not my legacy. My legacy is how am I going to impact the world, and how does it change a little bit because I was here. So I think that's how I think of it, that bridge is my legacy, and I need to make sure that it is as clear, as truthful, as, permeable for both sides, and that it is imperfect. So forget about trying to make it perfect. Yeah. It's a really great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya.
Yeah, I love that question. I think, like Rupi said, bridging is by nature imperfect. As someone, I think the term, I'm either first generation, 1.5 generation, second generation. People use different definitions, but the point is I'm the first in my family to be born and raised in America. And that means, for me, setting myself up to be a good ancestor as well. Acknowledging that if I do have kids, they'll likely be born here as well. And so how do I forge those connections to the homeland in the ways that my parents endeavored to ensure that I was connected? I was lucky enough every summer that until 2011, when the war began, every summer me and my family would spend the summer in Syria, which was, very important for my connection to my homelands. But in terms of good bridging work, I also think it means being a good ally and being as cognizant as I can be, like I said, of my blue passport privilege, whether that means supporting and uplifting causes in the homeland, especially helping to raise money and funds and awareness for Syrian causes around the needs that are ever present in the country due to the fallout from 2011, as well as trying my best to be a good ally and also set myself up to be a good ancestor. I try my best to be as vocal as I can be about my own positionalities, my various privileges and disprivileges, and like Rupi said as well, to avoid as best I can to be a family. I am also the family historian for sure. I'm the one like you who's sitting with the albums and collecting all the photos, and my siblings are obviously less interested, but trying to manage the balance of telling history without extracting it, I think, is such a deep part of creating the bridge. And obviously someone has to tell the story and record it, or else it will be lost. So as much as I can, I try to be as mindful of my positionalities as I can, while also doing the work to ensure that the stories aren't lost. I think that's my biggest thing. And so much of my bridging work is just making sure the stories don't get lost.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for questions, but thank you so much, Rupi and Maya, for being here today. This was so fascinating, and it was so great to hear from both of you, so thank you. I also want to just say thank you to our amazing AV team for making this hybrid setup happen, and thank you all for coming today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Lena.
Thanks for being